The Israeli Navy discovered some terrorists from the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade trying to swim from Gaza to an Israeli town, heavily armed and prepared to carry out an attack. So they shot them. And so I'm watching Al Jazeera because I had to see what their explanation was. And they said the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade confirmed that it was them, but they weren't really going to go carry out an attack. They were just training. So, they were training to carry out an attack, and Israel should not have shot at them because they were just practicing killing Israelis. They weren't actually killing Israelis. Just like the people on the Flotilla were actually just practicing baseball, and the Israeli commandos just happened to get in the way. So there's two issues here. Number one, there are very high military tensions, and I don't think that swimming in the ocean towards an Israeli city, heavily armed, is a good idea if you're really just training. And number two, you joined the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade. I know you would rather go up and smoke with dead Jews all around you, but aren't you proud to die anyway? Nonetheless, sending boats to Gaza with aid is now all the rage. Well, not really. They've been sending boats with aid for a while. It's just that they always docked in Ashdod and unloaded everything and sent it in trucks after it was inspected. I saw on CNN that many Palestinians feel that the aid doesn't always make it into Gaza, that the Israelis are stealing the Band-Aids and putting it on their own children's boo-boos. But luckily, there's a second option. You can take your boat to Egypt and dock it there. They've got great beaches there, and the pyramids are fantastic. The Rachel Corrie, as you probably heard, which is a ship named after this woman, was taken without incident after 7 attempts were made to convince it to port in Ashdod. The aid, as always, went straight to Gaza. But you know what's weird about the whole flotilla thing? When the aid was taken off the boat and they were trying to get it into Gaza, Hamas is like, no, we're not taking this aid until you do this and this and this. And I'm like, if there's really supposedly these dying people on the streets, are you trying to play politics with their lives? You're not doing us any favors by taking this. We're actually doing you a favor. You're trying to kill us, and we're trying to help keep the Palestinian people alive. And you know what else is weird about this Free Gaza organization? It's the organization that sent some of these boats over. Is they're shutting down their offices in Cyprus because Cyprus doesn't want them bringing their boats over there. Really? Why? They're just peace activists. Like the guy who was interviewed on the Marmara, and he's like, oh, I have tried to be a martyr 2 or 3 times, and it just hasn't happened, and Allah willing, it will happen now. Maybe he's thinking if he succeeds at dying at sea, he'll get 70 mermaids in the afterlife, which is so much cooler than just regular chicks feeding you grapes. Ultimately, this is media against media, and people arguing that they have the facts and the other people are lying. But I challenge you to look at the protests. I've been watching the protests, and I couldn't help but notice that ultimately the protesters were talking very little about the actual boat incident because I think the footage speaks for itself. More so about the Israel being in existence at all, and ultimately very much against the existence of the Jewish people. You know, like Hitler didn't do enough and go back to Poland, as if all the Jews in Israel came from Poland and Germany. Then on the other hand, the protests by the Israelis protesting other people protesting their existence pretty much just went out and grabbed a hand drum, tarbuka, and started singing the national anthem, and never did they say annihilate any other people group or nuke Gaza. That's because these protesters against Israel hate us, but we don't hate them back. Okay, now let me explain the never-ending saga of the use of disproportionate force. Have you ever wondered why Palestinians are always throwing rocks? It's because it's not because they don't have guns, and it's not because they don't teach their children to use guns. It's because it looks fantastic in a photograph. Having a little child throw a rock at a big tank is amazingly effective at propaganda. But ultimately, people need to understand just because they're throwing rocks doesn't mean we're going to get out of our tank and throw rocks back at them. If you really want to do away with this blockade, let's look at 2 issues. Number 1, return to us Gilad Shalit, who was kidnapped by the governing terror group Hamas about 4 years ago from within Israel. And second, could you just quit bombing our cities? And then you won't have a blockade. And you can bring in all the tomatoes and all the Band-Aids you ever wanted to.